a cup of coffee and make him feel welcome. There we have it.
Beautiful.
And on that note, I'm going to have a cup of tea, have a wonderful biscuit. Thank you, Sarah Sparks. I'm going to keep those. Alan McRoy, Sarah, kia ora. Thank you for your time. You've been absolutely wonderful. I'm Wallace Chapman. Checkpoint with Lisa Owen is right after 5. I'm back tomorrow, 3:45. Thanks to my producer, Liz. See you then.
Rongo mai koe ki te reo irarangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. Haere aki nei, community calamity. What's actually going on with Auckland's public transport? Ghost buses that never show, late to work, stranded school kids in detention to boot. Add to that troubled waters for Auckland ferry services and a crisis meeting. So what is the answer? Homeless in paradise. It's the less glossy side of Queenstown. Sorry or not sorry, Green Minister Marama Davidson apologises to the PM, but what about all the white men? And read the room, Mr Mayor. It seems that there is a lot of love for the super cities libraries in the face of budget cuts. Don't forget, you can watch us live on the RNZ website, Facebook and Freeview Channel 50.
RNZ News at 5. Ngā mihi o te ahi, ko Mark Leishman, tēnei. A man's been arrested following a 15-hour standoff in Stratford after police were shot at in the Taranaki town. Supporters of the man cheered and tooted car horns as he was led away from an address on Achilles Street. Our Taranaki Whanganui reporter Robin Martin has been at the police cordon.
Police say the incident began between 11 p.m. and midnight when the man refused to stop for officers. He abandoned his vehicle at the intersection of Pembroke Street and Broadway, where they say shots were fired at officers. He's then run to a home at the corner of Achilles and Celia Streets. Neighbours say they heard shots fired and tear gas canisters go off at the property during the night and again during the morning. Marama, a Waitara woman who travelled to Stratford to support him, says he had been terrified to come out. She was overjoyed he'd got out unharmed.
Te Pate Māori says Marama Davidson shouldn't have to apologise for anything after she copped criticism for saying white cis men were the main perpetrators of violence. Ms Davidson has since expressed regret for her comments made at a trans rights rally, which she says were said in shock after she was hit by a motorbike. National and ACT are demanding Ms Davidson, who is the Family and Sexual Violence Prevention Minister, to apologise. But Te Pate Māori co-leader Debbie Ngarewa Packer says there is no need.
It gives me the ick of what a privileged position to be in, asking a minority, a wahiri, a survivor of abuse to be in that position, and then to have her just be assaulted, and they made it more about how he felt, how they felt as the majority, their discomfort, than the discomfort that thousands of people live every day. And I think that was really disappointing.
Co-leader Rawiri Waititi says the government's backtracking over hate speech laws has emboldened the anti-transgender rhetoric seen at the weekend. The manager of Auckland's Citizens Advice Bureau says it won't survive if funding is cut. Mayor Wayne Brown intends to cut $2 million from council funding for CABs and is asking the government to fill in the gap. But CAB General Manager Kate Anderson says they do essential work and a budget cut would make it impossible to continue.
So the funding's gone, will be gone by Christmas. Mayor Brown may say that this is central government responsibility, but the fact is if Auckland Council cuts the funding, Citizens Advice Bureau in Auckland will finish. We will be gone, and the 163,000 people we helped last year won't have anywhere else to go.
Kate Anderson will meet with Wayne Brown tomorrow to discuss the Citizens Advice Bureau's submission on the city budget. A Queenstown man who is living in his car says he's worried what will happen once winter hits. The short supply of rentals means available rooms and houses are flooded with applications. People are resorting to living in cars, tents, hostels and couch surfing. One man who asked not to be named says he's been living in his car and working full-time for nearly 4 weeks.
A homeless person living in paradise for a lot of people at the minute. That's the situation we're in. And it's getting to a point where it's worrying because winter's around the corner and there's so many people living out of cars, vans, and, not everyone has access to a powered site or, a socket to plug in a heater overnight.
He says he's tired of seeing empty houses or more houses go on to short-term accommodation when people have to live in cars. The country's largest tertiary institution, Te Pūkenga, says its enrolments have fallen 10% compared to the same time last year. It says enrolments in campus-based courses often drop during periods of low unemployment. Te Pūkenga says it is combining the former polytechnics with industry training in order to avoid that boom and bust cycle of enrolments. Meanwhile, Te Wānanga or Aotearoa has reported a fall of 5% at most North Island universities. Domestic enrolments are also down between 4 and 10%. It's 4 minutes past 5. In sport, the second one-day cricket international between the Black Caps and Sri Lanka in Christchurch has been abandoned. The match was due to start at 2 p.m, but heavy rain at Hagley Oval meant play couldn't get underway. New Zealand lead the three-match series 1-0 after a big win in Auckland on Saturday. The final game is in Hamilton on Friday. Meanwhile, in the domestic one-day final, Canterbury reached 212 for 9 off their 50 overs. And a short time ago, Central Districts were 65 for 4 off 19 overs in reply. The last-placed Wellington Phoenix women have a hectic end to the A-League football season. The Phoenix lost to Newcastle away on Saturday. They play Adelaide in Adelaide tonight and then travel home for their final game of the season on Saturday against Melbourne Victory. Coach Natalie Lawrence says a failure to rotate the squad during busy periods last year won't be repeated this year, and she expects her football Ferns, who are playing next week in Turkey, to take a full part in the end of the club's season.
There definitely will be some rotation so that we can ensure that there is freshness around the field for all 3 games. There hasn't really been much talk about the squad leaving for Turkey. Everything's kind of been focused on ending the season as strongly as we can.
Kick-off is at 9 o'clock tonight. And in rugby league, crowd attendances are up in the NRL with just over 612,000 fans through the turnstiles across the first 4 rounds, the highest since the NRL was established in 1998. And that's the news.
A political walk back.
The problem politically is that she singled out one race or one ethnicity, talking about white men.
Protests in Israel.
Israel has become a very dangerous place to be in at the moment.
And a political swing in Scotland.
Joining the SNP for me was an act of hope, but it was also a statement of intent. I was determined then, as I am now.
Prime time radio weekdays from 6 on RNZ National.
This is RNZ National, funded through New Zealand On Air, online and on demand. And shortly we'll join Lisa Owen with Checkpoint. But right now a short forecast, which was released just about 15 minutes ago from Met Service till midnight Wednesday. North into Taumaranui, including Coromandel Peninsula, the Bay of Plenty and Taupo. Isolated showers becoming more widespread for a time this evening, then clearing tomorrow morning and becoming fine. Taranaki, Whanganui and Taihape, isolated showers turning to rain with heavy falls for a time this evening. Gisborne to Wairarapa, rain with heavy falls spreading north from Hawke's Bay this evening, followed by showers, becoming fine in Gisborne and Hawke's Bay tomorrow. Manawatu and Wellington, or to Wellington, also Nelson, Marlborough and Canterbury. Showers clearing from Nelson and inland Marlborough this evening. For Otago and Southland, showers becoming isolated in the evening, snow to 500 metres until tonight. Bulla and Fiordland, in fact, in all points in between, mostly fine. Showers about north and westland, and also Bulla. They will clear this evening. And for the Chatham Islands, showers turning to occasional rain tonight. It is 7 minutes past 5. I'll be back with headlines at about 20 past 5.
Nā mihi Mark, tēnā koutou katoa, nau mai haere mai ki Checkpoint I tēnei rā, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. Auckland's facing commuter calamity, plagued with ghost buses that never show, leaving workers stranded and some students late to school and saddled with detention. We'll have more on that later. But first, mass cancellations of ferries prompted the Transport Minister to call a crisis meeting late last week. And over the weekend, crew shortages saw services to Half Moon Bay, Birkenhead, Bayswater and Te Aniwa, Northcote Point canned. Fuller's 360 is cancelling at least 30% of its trips a week due to staff shortages. The ongoing disruptions saw the Transport Minister, who is also the Immigration Minister, bring together Auckland Transport, Waka Kotahi and Fuller's to nut out a solution. Fuller's 360 CEO Mike Horn says the Minister's now agreed to change immigration settings.
It was a really useful meeting to have. I'm reasonably pleased that he appears to have been listening and really considering things. The plan of attack is that he'd really like the industry to come together and just confirm as an industry what we're after, which I think is pretty reasonable. And we have 4 or 5 weeks to do that. So really what he was talking about is, one, we seem to have got the message through around immigration being on the green list, fast tracking and families. But his concern was, that's great, but if we fill the hole in the short term, I want some assurances from the industry that actually all the stuff we're talking about around training and accelerating people through the maritime industry needs to happen as well. And so that's what we're working through at the moment, to give some confidence across the industry that we're all aligned.
So you've previously told us that you would like roles like skippers to be placed on the green list, which means a fast track for coming into the country and bringing your family. What did the Minister say? Did he give you any undertakings?
Yes, he was very positive about that. He'd gone away and he'd discussed it with officials. It appears that is very favourable. And again, his key point was, if that's our commitment to get that going, what's the industry's commitment to actually train and progress people alongside that? So that's good.
So are you taking that, well, as a promise that he's going to put those workers on the green list, those jobs?
I absolutely am taking it as that. That was my understanding, and clearly we're pretty pleased that we had that level of movement in the last couple of weeks.
So which jobs? Just skippers or crew hands?
No, so it would be skippers and deckhands. And the interesting thing is that often you're bringing skippers across into New Zealand to start as deckhands. And the reason for that is the other piece I think I spoke about last time is lining up the qualifications. And that's why the training and the assessment on this side needs to be so slick. And we as an industry need to be really lined up with training providers and with Maritime New Zealand, all of whom were in the room last week, which was highly useful.
Are you paying enough, Mike? I've looked at the ads that you've got up at the moment. One for a skipper, it says up to $50 an hour, possible start time 4:30 in the morning, potential finish times 2 a.m, roster with no set pattern. And what, you'd have a couple of hundred people's lives in your hands, would you, when you're out there on the ferry?
Yeah, that's absolutely fair.
Okay, so is that good enough?
From a domestic perspective, it has been good enough, and it's at the top end, particularly with our company. Is that internationally competitive? No, it's not, and I think that's a really good point. So if we want to be internationally competitive so that people come to New Zealand, for example, as opposed to going Australia, we've got to get the immigration settings right, which I think we're working through, and we do need, as an industry, to review what we're paying the top end of our skills, so that people choose to come here as opposed to elsewhere for all the reasons you're talking to me about. So
Mike, that means raising wages across the board, doesn't it? If you're going to raise wages to get people in from other countries, you can't have the people who are employed domestically. You'd have to bump their wages up too, yeah?
Absolutely. So if we think about our situation with Maritime New Zealand, we're on a collective agreement. The collective agreement sets the rates for both our contracted services and our commercial services. So if we put the rate up for one group of people coming in from overseas, yes, it affects our whole business, and we would have to stump up on our side of things, which I think long term for the industry, as long as we get the training right, is probably a really good thing.
So tell me about the level of cancellations you've got at the moment. How many services are you cancelling a day? What percentage a week?
Look, I think it's about 30%, which is a big number. Now, in saying that, a lot of that is to do with skills. But if we go back and I look at my numbers for February, of all the cancellations we did, 60% of them were for weather, for cyclones and other bits and pieces. So just got to be careful that we're using the right numbers. But if you take weather out of it, the cancellations are all due to me just not having enough people across the board to do all the services that we're being asked to do.
Mike, your customers are really peeved. They're angry. What do you say to them?
Look, some of them are. Not all of our customers are peeved. And while I absolutely empathise with them, there's no question about that. What I'd also say is that my company is actually providing an outstanding service with what's sitting in front of us. So we're doing everything that we can with the available resources. All our people, in fact, I'm probably stretching my people too far, but all of the vessels that we have and all of my management team, 100% committed. So as soon as we can work through what good looks like, particularly as an industry, then absolutely we need to be delivering more than we are right now.
How much are you paying for Ubers and taxis for cancelled services?
I'm not paying anything. That's all covered under the Auckland Transport contracts.
So they stump up for those replacement services, do they? When you say, and we see it popping up all the time on social feeds, that there's going to be an Uber or a taxi replacement because the ferry's off, Auckland Transport picks up the tab for that.
Yes, it's all covered under contract. Yes, absolutely.
Do you know how much the value of that is on a weekly basis?
No, I couldn't tell you that at this stage. I really don't know.
Must be in the thousands though, Mike.
Look, I really don't know, because remember that they're also stumping up and paying for all the ferry services as well. So where the ferry services aren't running, there's a rebate, and then that goes to, I would assume, to paying for taxis and Ubers. So one in, one out, if you think about it that way.
And that's Mike Horn, the CEO of Fuller's. We're going to have more on the situation with public transport in Auckland a little later in the program, but would love to hear from you about your experience on ferries. Text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or the email address checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. It is 5:15. Kia amo tonu mai, do stay with us. Opposition parties are demanding the Greens co-leader, Marama Davidson, publicly apologise for saying white cis men are the main perpetrators of violence. Ms Davidson made the remarks during a charged confrontation with a conspiracy theorist at the weekend. She's since apologised to the Prime Minister for lumping the blame on one race, but National and ACT want her to go further.
Trans people are terrific.
So you condone that violence?
Taonga.
You condone that violence against her?
Taonga.
Greens co-leader Marama Davidson in a heated exchange with a far-right activist. She was confronted as she left the trans rights rally in Auckland on Saturday.
Terrific. Trans people are true. Trans people are fantastic.
The conspiracy theorist continues to question Ms Davidson, who at the end of the clash references her job as Minister for the Prevention of Family and Sexual Violence.
I am a prevention violence minister, and I know who causes violence in the world. It is white cis men. That is white cis men.
Okay, but so
these comments outraged the opposition, who labelled them harmful, wrong and immature. By yesterday afternoon, Ms Davidson had issued a statement clarifying her comments. She said the encounter took place shortly after she'd been struck by a motorcyclist and she was still in shock. Ms Davidson says she should have made clear that violence occurs in every community. This morning she called Prime Minister Chris Hipkins and apologised for blaming one race for violence.
She's indicated those aren't the words that she would normally use and she regrets having used them.
But National leader Christopher Luxon doesn't think saying sorry to the Prime Minister is enough. Mr Luxon wants Ms Davidson to apologise to the people she offended, though he wouldn't say when asked repeatedly if that's white men.
She made a sweeping generalisation. The comments were wrong, they were offensive. She gave a justification as to why she made them, but she didn't actually apologise.
Mr Luxon, who is a cis white man, says he wasn't personally offended by Ms Davidson's comments.
Personally, I wasn't super offended. I don't listen too closely to what Marama Davidson has to say.
Ex-David Seymour also wants Ms Davidson to say sorry.
I think she should apologise to all taxpayers for not doing her job. We want to stop racially profiling people, so to apologise to a demographic would just be repeating the logic of the original era.
The opposition doubling down on their demands in the House.
Why does she not accept that her words did not respect cis white men?
Why can't she apologise to the victims of family and sexual violence for belittling their trauma for political gain?
Marama Davidson has not delivered the apology Actor National are hoping for. She's instead stressing she's clarified her comments.
I have clarified what I intended to say and particularly affirm and acknowledge victims and survivors who may not have seen themselves in my comments and wanted to make sure I affirm their experiences.
Te Pāti Māori co-leader Debbie Ngāriwa-Paka says Ms Davidson has nothing to apologise for.
What a privileged position to be in, asking a minority, a wahere, a survivor of abuse, to be in that position, and then to have her just be assaulted, and they made it more about how he felt, how they felt as the majority, their discomfort, than the discomfort that thousands of people live every day.
Prime Minister Chris Hipkins says as far as he's concerned, the situation has been dealt with.
Let us know your thoughts on that one too. Does Marama Davidson owe white cis men a universal apology? 2101 on text or tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. The man at the centre of a standoff with police in Stratford has been arrested and taken into custody. Police negotiators in the Armed Offenders Squad surrounded a house for more than 12 hours and say they were shot at during the ordeal. A man was finally arrested just before 3 o'clock this afternoon. Reporter Robin Martin was on the scene as the day unfolded.
It began when a car fled police in the early hours of Tuesday morning. According to the police, the man in question was in a car which failed to stop when requested. Shots were fired at officers and the car fled before being ditched on State Highway 3, the main drag, near the centre of Stratford town. The man then fled south, holing up in a house near the corner of Achilles Street and Celia Street. Neighbours say they were woken up in the early hours to running footsteps and loud bangs. Police negotiators and the Armed Offenders Squad surrounded a house. Jessie Lee Boylan, who has 3 kids under 4, says she was woken at about 10:30 last night by a commotion outside. She says she heard running footsteps and a little later what sounded like a gunshot. She says at about 8 o'clock this morning she was getting her kids ready for daycare when she heard more loud bangs.
So I waited about 15-20 minutes and I didn't hear anything else, so I was like, right, time to get off to daycare, and I don't think I'll be staying here tonight. I'll be staying on the other side of Stratford with the rest of my family.
Avon School and St Joseph's Catholic School both went into lockdown, which was lifted at about midday after police advised the risk to them was low. A friend of the man had travelled from Waitara to try and convince him to come out without a fight. Marama, who did not want to give her last name, says the man was already known to police. She spoke to him on the phone earlier today.
I spoke to him earlier and said, it's that gun. You get that gun out of that house. You just throw it out, and then really they have no reason to be firing at you. But why you got that gun? Of course, I would expect them to fire at you.
He was taken into custody by police at 3 o'clock. Marama says she's happy it ended without anyone getting hurt.
We're happy with that, really, really happy that he's alive. And I guess they're taking him to the New Plymouth police station and we'll take it from there.
The incident lasted more than 12 hours and police say nobody was injured.
It is 21 minutes after 5 and you're with Checkpoints on RNZ National. Homai or whakaaro, we would love your feedback about anything you've heard on the program this evening. You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or the email address is checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. It's time to go to the headlines now. Ko Mark Anō tēnei.
Thanks, Lisa. Prime Minister Chris Hipkins is attempting to draw a line under Green Party co-leader Marama Davidson's comments that white cis men are the main perpetrators of violence. Ms Davidson has expressed regret for her words at Saturday's Auckland trans rights rally and says violence occurs in every community. But both National and the ACT Party want an apology. Supporters of a man at the centre of a 15-hour standoff with armed police at a house in Stratford, Taranaki, cheered as he was led away under arrest. The standoff on Achilles Street began after a vehicle fled from police last night and shots were fired at officers. It ended shortly after 3 p.m. and police say there were no injuries. The government says longer detention periods for asylum seekers arriving by boat will ensure they all get legal advice. A bill introduced to Parliament today would allow asylum seekers to be detained for up to 4 weeks if they arrive en masse. The Immigration Minister, Michael Wood, denies it is a populist move in an election year. Enrolments are down 10% at the country's largest tertiary education institution. Te Pukenga says enrolments often drop during low unemployment, and it's combining the former polytechnics with industry training to keep numbers consistent. And Met Service has a snow watch for the Queenstown Lakes and Central Otago, and there are road snowfall warnings for the Lewis, Arthurs and Porters passes. At the Tekapo Springs hot pools, about 50 people have been relaxing while surrounded by a dusting of autumn snow. It is 5:24 now. We'll have more headlines in 20 minutes. Full news at 6.
Ngā mihi, Mark. New Zealand football is set to receive around $13 million in funding from FIFA over the next 4 years via the governing body's development program. The record-breaking investment in football comes as FIFA expects to generate just over $17 billion between 2023 and 2026. The money each of the 211 member associations will get is a 30% increase on the previous 4-year cycle and will be a game changer for smaller football nations. And we're joined now by sports reporter Felicity Reid. So what does this type of windfall mean for football in New Zealand? What are you allowed to spend it on?
Well, for some of the bigger countries, $13 million wouldn't really mean that much to them. But for New Zealand, which is part of the Oceania Confederation, and so the surrounding confederations in Oceania as well, this is actually quite a big deal. It allows them to work on the grassroots side of the game. So that's building things at the grassroots, as well as supporting their national teams and the costs associated with having their national teams. So that $13 million is actually the third round of the FIFA Forward Development Programme. And that's the third instalment of that funding. So the first instalment was in 2016 to 2018. And New Zealand Football used that money on just about 40 projects. That included 2 artificial turfs in Dunedin and a floodlit training and playing facility. It was also just under $900,000 on the national team. So that's the All Whites, the football ferns and the development teams around there as well. The $45,000 on the National Women's League and $54,000 on capacity building. So that next lot of money that was coming for them just as COVID hit, so that was 2019, 2022. So they used a lot of that money, what they've described as safeguarding football during the pandemic. So this latest lot of money is not a handout from FIFA. It's audited, and there are only 3 categories really that they can sort of funnel this money into. So the restrictions for it sort of comes for payments for equipment and travel. So that's around, say, getting teams to different competitions, the operation costs of running New Zealand football, and around specific projects that they have. So that was like the building of those turfs, or if they anywhere else wants to try and sort of build the game in that way as well. So it'll be interesting to see what this latest windfall is actually spent on from New Zealand football, especially as they've got a World Cup here and maybe some more women wanting to get into the game. So maybe they're going to need to look at more facilities for different areas as well.
Yeah, interesting. And the Women's Football World Cup is only a few months away, and how are the ticket sales going?
Well, I checked in with them this afternoon, the organisers, so that's 600,000 tickets have been sold across New Zealand and Australia for the tournament. But it's a bit cruel for us to be talking about it now, because if people wanted to jump online and purchase their tickets right now, they can't. They're going to have to wait until April 11, which sort of marks 100 days before the tournament. And that's because with that large number of tickets that they've already sold, they haven't actually allocated seats for those people yet. So that needs to happen to make sure that they say so that all the Americans can sit together in the stands, or all of the different countries, to sort of stop spreading out the supporters and I guess create those little bays or atmosphere around a tournament kind of like this. And I did ask them which some of the most top-selling games were, so it's not really a surprise. The tickets for the USA are in hot demand.
Of course, yeah.
So that's the replay of the 2019 final between USA and Netherlands, which is going to be in Wellington. That's actually the top-selling game across the tournament. And also, of course, the football ferns as well. If people are wanting to see them, their games, 3 games are going quite hot at the moment as well. But just remember as well, for a tournament like this, you can't walk up and purchase tickets. So you'll need to do that ahead of time. And that's that April 11, 100 days to go. That's when those individual tickets go back on sale, and that's when the World Cup organisers are encouraging people to get in there so they don't miss out on some of the tickets or games that they actually want to see.
So fastest fingers first on the keyboard. Thank you, Felicity. Felicity Reid there with Sports News. School students have lamented getting detentions because their buses are so late or they don't show up at all. Residents of East Coast Bays in Auckland say a severe shortage of buses is leaving people waiting for hours at bus stops. Auckland Transport says the problem is a long-standing shortage of drivers. Reporter Louise Tanuth and camera operator Marika Habazi have the story.
It was a full house at Mairangi Bay Bowling Club last night, with public transport users sharing their busing woes and seeking answers from AT. Queues were building up the aisle as people lined up to get a word in. Many were parents and students.
Here with my friend, we're both solo parents, both work, so we're very reliant on the public transport to get our kids to and from school. The 83 is not in existence during school hours. It just does not turn up. It's not on the app saying that it's been cancelled. It just doesn't turn up. It's like a ghost bus, or he gets there and he sees that it's cancelled, but the app hasn't told us, so we've got no way of arranging how we're going to do that. Meanwhile, I'm at work.
I work at Long Bay College. Either side of the school bus, they're like cancelled from 7:15 till 9 o'clock. We will follow the school bus along, but because there's no public bus, all the kids are on that bus, and it will drive by the kids. I go into school and tell them at the student centre, but they still get a detention.
Most of the time they just don't show up or they're cancelled. Led us to taking a different bus route, which leads to being like taking an hour longer to get to school.
Safety was also a huge concern.
So people are standing, they are absolutely shoulder to shoulder. And I was on a double-decker recently that had an emergency stop on the bus, on the bridge, and can I tell you it's dangerous, so my bruises are now easing.
I like to get home places before dark, especially if I'm alone or if I'm far from home. And the bus cancellations have made that extremely risky.
Not only are students late to school, many are late to work.
I'm having to text my manager quite a bit saying, look, it's happening again, I am going to be late. There's some times where I've got to spend my own money on getting like an Uber.
There was a shortage of truck drivers and people could go and drive.
Auckland Transport puts all this down to a shortage of drivers. It's short 360 in Auckland. East Coast Bays MP and Nationals immigration spokesperson Erica Stanford says it's an issue Immigration Minister Michael Wood needs to take responsibility for.
When our borders opened up after COVID, we just didn't get our work visa stream opened up quickly enough to get people in the country. And so last year we saw the fact that not just only bus drivers, but people in all sectors of the economy, we're desperately short of workers.
She says recent changes to improve pathways for drivers to get residency are too little, too late.
We knew at the beginning of last year we had a massive bus driver shortage. We knew we were hundreds short across the country, and yet nothing was done till the end of last year. So we are now, as we're heading into the peak period of needing buses, there's a real crunch.
But Group Manager of Metro Services, Derek Coper, is confident new changes to immigration settings and a $61 million investment from the government to boost wages will fill the gaps. He says the North Shore is a tricky area to attract local drivers to and to find accommodation for those coming from overseas. When asked about his reaction to school children being left on the road and late for school, he admits it's concerning.
I was disappointed to hear that some reports that some dedicated school services were cancelled. We will follow up on that and we will look at how we can prioritise school children to services.
Auckland Transport is pinning its hopes on September to be back at full capacity with drivers on the road.
Louise Tanuth reporting there, and if you are listening on radio, the video version filmed by Marika Habazi will be on our website. It is 28 minutes to 6. Kia amo tonu mai. Do stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National, and it's time for the business news. Ko taku hoa I Nai ko Nona Peltier, who's in the studio with me. Nona, there's been a slight lift in employment, but a new survey shows businesses are still struggling to find staff. I think you kind of see that around the city. What are the details?
Well, we've just heard that with the bus drivers,
Prime example.
So this is an annual skills shortage survey by the Employment and Manufacturers Association. I think that's Employer and Manufacturers.
Yes, EMA. The EMA,
yes,
short.
that's right.
Yep.
Okay, well, 90% of the folks that they surveyed recently are struggling to find staff. In many cases, a third of them have had ads running for more than half a year and not being able to fill those positions. Again, they're talking about immigration as being an issue. It's worse when they get to the higher skilled jobs. It's finding it really tough to fill them. The industry is responding with, more internships, taking on apprenticeships and that sort of thing, but it's still not working. So that's a problem that's widespread. It's not just the bus drivers. It's right across the board. And I think people know that. Staff shortages is making it difficult for people to get the services that they want and having to wait for the services that they need.
Now, the government cybersecurity department is urging people to take data thefts more seriously. What's been happening to prompt this?
Now, I think most people may have heard that in the news that there was an organisation called Latitude. It's an Australian-based organisation.
Credit company.
Yeah, and they held a lot of data, some data that they probably shouldn't have been holding, private information, passport information, driver's license, you name it, and they were hacked. And it's affecting a lot of people. Some 8 million people are probably been affected, and their details have been stolen by hackers. So this is something that everybody should be aware of, even if you're not affected by this particular hack. They're very common. It can go on before you know it. You've lost out. And so CERT, which is the government organization in charge of cybersecurity, is saying, for goodness sake, do not take these data thefts for granted. Use the information that they provide, change your password, 2-step verification, just all sorts of measures that you should be taking to protect yourself.
Don't use your mother's birthday for every account you've got.
Or 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Yeah, exactly. And speaking of numbers, Nona, the markets, please.
Well, what a good day on the market today. The NZX Top 50 Index, it rose more than 1 1/3%. There was a 158-point gain to 11,771. And that's because the markets are feeling a little bit less concerned about bank closures and so forth. Okay, the dollar also gained against the US dollar today. It was trading at 62.3 US cents, but otherwise steady at 93.1 Australian and 50.6 British pence.
Thank you, Nona. Ka kite. Nona Peltier there with business news. Homeless in paradise, that's how Queenstown residents describe living in the resort town during the housing crisis. People are resorting to living in cars, tents, hostels and couch surfing as rentals are in very short supply. With snow on the hills and winter creeping closer, there is a dire need for solutions. Tess Brunton has more.
I'm living out of a car, not even a caravan, just like a normal car that you obviously get about your daily life in, while also working full-time, while also looking for houses, while also trying to find somewhere to shower every night and somewhere to cook.
This is how one Queenstown man, who asked not to be named, has been living for the past 3.5 weeks after his landlord told him to leave so they could renovate. He's currently on a visa that ties him to the area and says it's taking a toll on his mental health.
A homeless person living in paradise for a lot of people at the minute. That's the situation we're in, and it's getting to a point where it's worrying because winter's around the corner and there's so many people living out of cars, vans, and not everyone has access to a powered site or, a socket to plug in a heater overnight, and it's just very, very tough out here.
He's tired of seeing empty houses or more houses become short-term accommodation when there are people who have been living in cars for months. It's been even tougher now the temperature is dropping.
I've got like a sleeping bag, duvet, and I just put as many layers on as possible to sort of keep warm during the nights. Put like neck warmers on, sometimes even sleep with gloves. It gets to that point.
There are more than 870 households on the Queenstown Lakes Community Housing Trust waiting list. About 80% are Queenstown-based. Its chief executive, Julie Scott, says the state of rental housing is diabolical.
It's a real crisis. I haven't seen anything like this in a long, long time. I think the issue is probably worse than pre-COVID in terms of the number of homeless people.
There's no quick fix or one issue to solve. She says the healthy home rules, while fantastic for tenants' well-being, have meant some landlords have switched to short-term stays to avoid paying for upgrades, and other homes are sitting empty. The most recent census data suggests more than a quarter of the district's houses are unoccupied.
We're imploring homeowners who have these unoccupied homes to lease them out, perhaps a 6-month basis or an 8-month basis. But if they want it for a couple of weeks over summer, well, then that's fine. But let somebody use it in the interim. So that's another aspect that we're looking into.
The Trust has 3 projects on the go, including a 68-lot development in Arrowtown that should have some houses completed next year. Happiness House manager Lena Boss says families and individuals are struggling to put a roof over their head. She says available rooms and homes are in short supply, are often very expensive and are flooded with applications. She's facing an uncertain future after the house she's lived in for more than 3 years was recently sold.
Definitely kind of unsettling, and I guess it shows that it's everybody's concern. Everybody's in that same situation. It can happen to anyone.
She says the situation will get worse closer to the ski season if nothing is done. The local council is working towards new inclusionary zoning rules that would mean most new residential developments will pay a fee towards more affordable housing. Housing Minister Megan Wood says 300 new homes are being built. Funding for infrastructure is supporting more new builds, and the government is working on a joint plan to address the housing challenges.
It is 20 to 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Let's do some of your feedback now. Someone has taken the time to type out quite a lengthy piece of feedback about Fuller's, so bear with me. They say the weekend before last, a school group of 65 students and several staff were left stranded on Rangitoto Island. The group had booked the ferry weeks in advance due to the size. We were completing an overnight tramp on the island. We were at the terminal at 12, ready for the 2:20 ferry on Sunday, which never arrived. We called Fuller's. They tried to claim there had been a ferry and we had missed it. Then they said a ferry would arrive in 15 minutes. It did, but it had been diverted from Waiheke and only had 40 seats. So they took other waiting customers but could not accommodate our group. Several phone calls later, we were told a ferry should be there at 4:30. Fuller's were dismissive about our need to get students out of the sun, about the lack of drinking water, and about their obligation to our original booking. It was pretty unacceptable on all fronts. This is in response to Fuller's saying they're cancelling about 30% of their services a week and are having staffing issues. And this one in from Patrick, who says, what a joke. They've had years to train adequate staff. Same old, privatise the profits, socialise the losses. Time to rip up their contract, reckons Patrick. Keep your feedback coming, homai or whakaaro. You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or you can email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Time for the headlines. Anea Mark, mina pitipiti kōrero.
Ngā mihi, Lisa. Aucklanders have until 11 o'clock tonight to have their say on the council's proposals to close a $295 million budget shortfall. The majority of Auckland's local boards are proposing to reduce libraries' opening hours from 7 to 6 days a week. Meanwhile, the head of Auckland's Citizens Advice Bureau will meet Mayor Wayne Brown tomorrow for talks over a proposed $2 million funding cut. CAB General Manager Kate Anderson says they assisted 163,000 Aucklanders last year and the cut would make it impossible to continue. Police say they're investigating incidents at the weekend protest in Auckland against British anti-transgender activist Posy Parker, but they will not comment on any investigation relating to a motorcyclist knocking Green Party co-leader Marama Davidson to the ground at a pedestrian crossing during Saturday's gathering. New Zealand Red Cross says most of the $18 million donated to its Cyclone Gabrielle Disaster Fund appeal should be committed within 6 months. The organisation has already allocated over $1 million to Wairoa District Council to help repair 278 yellow-stickered homes that need work not covered by insurance. And health body Te Whatu Ora says there's no evidence of any transmission of the drug-resistant fungus Candida auris in hospitals. It's been detected in one patient in New Zealand so far. Candida auris can cause persistent fever and chills and kills about 1/3 of the people it infects. We'll have a full news roundup at 6. It is 18 minutes to 6 now.
Kia ora rā, Eho. A Corrections Department recruitment ad has fallen foul of the Advertising Standards Authority for perpetuating a negative stereotype of a Māori boy. The TV commercial showed a young Māori boy talking about his Māori father, who was a former inmate, and the corrections officer who helped him, with the boy saying he might become a corrections officer one day too. The ASA upheld the complaints about the commercial. Well, joining us now is Advertising Standards Authority CEO Hilary Suter. Kia ora, Hilary.
Kia ora, Lisa.
Can you just talk us through the nature of the complaints? What were they concerned about?
Sure. There are actually 2 ads that were complained about. So the first one was the one you described, and the second one was about an interaction between the Māori former prisoner and a Pākehā prison guard with the young boy present as well. The issues that the complainants raised, there were 4 complaints in total. The complainants found the ads offensive, and they were concerned about the negative stereotype of Māori and Pacifica people as criminals, and kind of the reinforcement of an unequal power dynamic, particularly in the ad, the longer ad, which has got the prisoner and the corrections officer speaking in front of the child, and how those 2 characters were depicted.
And so in both commercials that are complained about, the corrections officer is Pākehā?
Yes.
Okay. So did you as a board agree on all counts with regard to the complaint?
Look, there was a minority view in relation to the first ad you talked about. That's the 15-second ad, the shorter ad, where you see the Māori boy in the forefront and the adults in the background. And some of the board thought that the identity of the 2 adults in the background wasn't obvious enough to create that level of harm. But the majority of the board thought it was a problem. And in our process, the majority view stands.
Okay, so the majority believe that they perpetuated negative stereotypes and that it's likely to be offensive and harmful to some viewers. What did corrections have to say to you about the advertisements and their reasoning?
They put forward a very comprehensive response. They explained that they'd done a lot of work along with their agency in terms of trying to get this right. They had a campaign of ads, so there are 9 ads in total. We've actually had complaints about 3, one of which was no grounds to proceed. And they also talked about the level of work they'd done to consult in terms of the script, and they were looking to try and change the narrative. Some of their ads have been perceived as negative in the past, and they wanted to do something that was more positive, and they got some good feedback on that. The issue for the ASA really relates to our codes of practice. So under the Advertising Standards Code, which covers all ads and all media, we have certain rules, particularly in the area of social responsibility. And that's the ruler that we run over the ads when we get complaints.
I see in corrections response, they highlight the fact that there is obviously a disproportionate number of Māori who are currently in the corrections system, 53%. What consideration did you give to that when you looked at who they had got to play the characters in the advertisement?
Yeah, look, the board did consider that and certainly take on board, the challenge that the department has and the reality of that statistic. But in the board's view, the way that the 2 characters interacted sort of made that, the power imbalance that was reflected using those two characters was what really tipped it over the edge.
Really appreciate your time. Thank you for joining us. That is the Advertising Standards Authority CEO, Hilary Suter there. It is 13 minutes to 6. Kia amo tonu mai. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. Survivors of abuse in state care say suggestions they could face delays over redress are an insult. The idea was raised in a briefing for the incoming Minister for the Public Service, Andrew Little, who replaces Chris Hipkins in the role. Officials say they aren't recommending that course of action, but two former patients of Lake Alice Psychiatric Hospital's Child and Adolescent Unit aren't happy it was even mentioned. Jimmy Allingham reports.
Carolyn Wildbohr was sent to the notorious units where patients were punished with electric shock therapy and given painful paralysing drugs when she was just 12 and 13 in 1974 and 1975. She's never spoken out before but feels compelled to now, while survivors of the abuse there continue to wait for redress and compensation.
Nobody has ever wanted to listen to us. That's our reason for actually being here. Fact of people that have already passed away, the ones that have committed suicide, and the fact that they have never had a voice. That's why I'm here. I'm their voice.
That voice is saying, don't forget about us. It's almost 2 years since the Royal Commission of Inquiry into Abuse in State Care hearing into Lake Alice. Still, neither an apology to former patients nor redress have happened. Last week, RNZ revealed that in a briefing to incoming Minister for the Public Service Andrew Little, officials raised the possibility of deferring decisions on design proposals for redress until after this year's election. Mr Little has said this isn't something he sought advice on nor discussed with fellow ministers, but Carolyn Wildbohr is upset officials would even suggest it.
It's just, I don't want to deal with it, so we'll push it out until it's going to come to the end where none of us are alive and our kids will have to try and force this to happen.
The 61-year-old from Levin has lived with the stigma of association with the Lake Alice unit, although she and many others there had no mental illness.
People look at you and go, you must have mental issues. And it's like, hey, I got the stamp on my hand to say, no, I didn't. The fact is people don't see our generation as being important because we're old now. They don't care.
For Carolyn Wildbohr, the trauma of having to relive what happened to her is taking a toll.
I thought I had issues. Boy, have I got them now. You know, just I've come up and I'm on ACC at the moment because of the fact of chronic PTSD, some form of depression, because of the sheer fact of having to deal with this every time. It's not being let go.
The Royal Commission's report into the Lake Alice unit recognises torture happened there, and former patients Paul Zentfeld and Malcolm Richards have findings in their favour when they complained to the UN Committee Against Torture. Given that, Mr Zentfeld is unhappy that officials raised the possibility of delaying redress and says it should happen as soon as possible.
They've got to stop looking for options to try and get out of it. It's been proven, so pay for your crimes. That's all I can say. Pay for your crimes. And stop using delusional tactics and think people are going to like it because we're not. Stop being so mean and grow up.
The Crown Response Unit to the Royal Commission says the briefing didn't recommend deferring redress design work. It says, quote, on the contrary, the Crown Response has a singular focus on progressing the new system development at pace, in line with the expectation of survivors. It says the briefing clearly states the possibility of slowing the work was, quote, only offered in light of the focus on reprioritising initiatives across the wider public sector following the change in leadership.
It's 10 minutes to 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Aucklanders have just a few hours left to have their say on sweeping cuts the council's proposing to meet a massive shortfall in its annual budget. The region's libraries stand to lose funding through reduced hours and programs. But some Auckland residents say libraries are essential for the community and their education and shouldn't be interfered with. Reporter Tom Taylor and cameraman Nick Monroe have the story.
In the consultation document for this year's annual plan, Auckland Mayor Wayne Brown doesn't mince his words. He says the council needs to reduce spending on nice-to-haves and instead prioritise projects that'll make Auckland a resilient city. The mayor's taken aim at declining book readership and questioned whether libraries need to be open as long as they are, and whether they can make better use of volunteers as opposed to paid staff. The council's local boards, all charged with making savings, have have put forward their own plans, many of which involve significant cuts to library services. Here at Auckland's Central City Library, opening hours may be reduced to 6 days a week. It's one of several cuts that may affect the region's libraries, with job cuts potentially on the line too. We asked the people of Tamaki Makaurau what they made of these proposals.
I would say that would be quite short-sighted. I think particularly at the moment there's a lot of people who need these types of community services, and I think there's other areas where Auckland Council could find budget.
I would get pretty annoyed because I remember growing up I was always in the library in the weekends because you had no sport on, you'd just be there reading comic books or reading children's books.
If you're going to cut the hours back, that's like going to be a lot more people out on the streets, mate.
The number of items, including e-books, issued by Auckland Libraries has dipped over the last 3 years, with the 13.1 million items checked out in 2022 falling well short of the council's target of 16.4 million. But the council also notes that these numbers were impacted by COVID-19. And as these Aucklanders say, the services libraries provide go well beyond book lending.
Honestly, I think it's just kind of having like a communal space that everyone can kind of go to and have access to like knowledge and everything, because we do kind of tend to live in a really kind of separate kind of world now. So I think those public areas are really good.
Well, I think they provide a lot of access for a lot of people who might not necessarily have it. Obviously access to information, internet, books. So I think it's an important community service.
Cameron's working on a university project and says the library is an indispensable resource for specialty engineering or science publications. He's concerned that budget cuts may mean fewer qualified librarians who can help him find information fast.
If I'm going to look for a book that I don't know the genre of, I'm usually always going to start for help because I would have no clue where it is otherwise. And if I need somewhere quiet to study and stuff like that, I would go there and I would find a little spot to study in and read a book.
Cameron says reducing funding for libraries would have negative outcomes for New Zealanders' education, and not only for university students like himself.
Education is a pretty important thing, so investing in that, I feel like we should invest in it more and not take away funding, especially something like education and library. A lot of people that are misfortunate don't have access to computers, books, stuff at home, so a place where they can go, feel safe and get educated, it's pretty good in my opinion.
Most local boards list libraries' opening hours as one of the areas they could cut, usually from 7 to 6 days a week. Some local boards, such as Albert Eden, would look to implement a network approach, staggering closures to ensure a nearby library is open. Howick's local board says cuts could mean a decrease in literacy programs and access to information, while the Kaipatiki local board says they could also lead to job losses. Consultation for Auckland Council's annual budget closes at 11 o'clock tonight.
And joining me now is former Silver Fern and GM of Alan Duff's charity, Duffy Books and Homes, Linda Wagner. Kia ora, Linda.
Oh, talofa lava, Lisa. Great to be on the program tonight.
Hey, tell us a little bit about what you fear will happen if these cuts do go ahead. What's the worst?
Oh, God, the worst is, seeing a community that is already having to deal with barriers across, inequities right across the board, whether it's education or, social interaction with each other, just seeing all of that disappear. This is a service that is free to our communities. And, why do we always have to touch things that are working well, just leave things that are working well and that are, that is a service to our communities, to our whānau and to our people that are most in need, our people that are continuously being marginalised are the ones that continue to be losing all that's meant to be supporting them and lifting them.
Do you think it will have a direct effect on literacy in the community?
Oh, 100%. I mean, you just got to look at what some of the drives are around the country now. We've got government who are wanting to pour money into literacy and parties that are talking about what they want to do with literacy and education. And you've got, I just went to a principals conference last week and everything is around literacy, numeracy and extending learning, facilitating for our young people. And then on the other hand, we're trying to cut them at the knees and not provide the space for this to happen. So absolutely, I think there's an essential role that our libraries play in particular in our communities, especially, I'm seeing our whānau who are constantly hurt by things that are taken away from them, and this is certainly something that will, stop access, stop their learning ability to, it's a space where they go and find themselves, and it's a space where they can go and communicate with others and find how better they can be people in our society, right?
So you've touched on a couple of things there, but maybe I can get you to address some of the claims and suggestions being made by Auckland's Mayor Wayne Brown. He's suggesting it doesn't have to be bricks and mortar, right? You could maybe borrow books digitally or online. Your thoughts on that?
Let's borrow books online. That's if you've got access to, to internet. That's if you can afford to have a home, number one, that has internet so that you can afford to pay for books that are digitally available. But it's just the whole spiritual, mental, physical poverty that is constantly in our communities that would need a library space. Taking that away just means that the extension of learning, the extension of interaction and connection amongst our communities, this is something that you can't sort of provide just basically online. And a lot of our communities are already marginalised from the opportunity to make a submission. Where's the community consultation to have everybody have a say? And doing this digitally is not always the best way for the communities who use the space the most.
Linda, we are almost out of time, but the clock is ticking on submissions. So you've got a second now. You've got about 30 seconds to make your pitch to people in terms of having their say. What would you like people to do? There's barriers in lives that will always, stop us from succeeding. And I think for a nation to be strong literally and a nation that values success and literacy, let's get out there and push each other to put a submission in. Literacy is so important. The key to success is in learning how to read, and to be a child that cannot communicate in reading becomes an adult who cannot communicate in our society, and that's a real loss. Thank you for your time. That's Linda Wangara, who is Alan Duff's charity, Duffy Books. She is the general manager of that, Duffy Books and Homes. Maybe you can take the opportunity to tell us how you feel about library services. Do you use them? Do you want them to stay in their current form? Are you going to make a submission? You've got several hours now. It is 11 o'clock, is it? I'm just giving the eyeball to my producer, and she tells me, you've got until 11 o'clock tonight. You can go online, make a submission, have your voice heard. Let us know your thoughts via text 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or you can email us checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. We'd love to know what you are using the library for. Is it just for reading books, or are there other services and things going on there that draw you in to these places? And what would it mean if they close them for one day a week?
RNZ News at 6. Ngā mihi o te pō. Good evening, I'm Mark Leishman. Fuller's 360 says more staff should help ease disruptions to Auckland ferry services. Mass cancellations of ferries prompted the Transport Minister to call a crisis meeting late last week. Fuller's 360 is cancelling at least 30% of its trips a week due to staff shortages. Chief Executive Mike Horn told Checkpoint the Minister's now agreed to change immigration settings to allow more workers into the country.
It was a really useful meeting to have. I'm reasonably pleased that he appears to have been listening and really considering things. The plan of attack is that he'd really like the industry to come together and just confirm as an industry what we're after.
Mike Horn says they'll use the next few weeks to identify what they need as an industry. A man's been arrested following a 15-hour standoff in Stratford after police were shot at in the Taranaki town. Supporters of the man cheered and tooted car horns as he was led away from an address on Achilles Street. Police say the standoff began after a vehicle fled from police last night and shots were fired at officers. The car was abandoned on State Highway 3 in the north of the town, and the man barricaded himself in a suburban house. A friend of the man says she's happy it ended at 3 p.m. without anyone getting hurt. Police say nobody was injured. And 2 schools were in lockdown for some hours. Avon School Principal Lisa Hill says staff were in lockdown before school started, so parents kept children home. Police told her it was safe at about 11:30.
The situation was still the same, but the risk was low, and that we could make the move out of lockdown. And with it being that much closer to our boundary, we were just mindful of what we were hearing and what we were seeing, and then made the choice as things had quietened down about 1:20.
St Joseph's Catholic School was also in lockdown between about 8:30 and 12:30 today. The police won't comment on an investigation relating to the Green Party co-leader Marama Davidson being knocked over by a motorbike at the weekend protest against British anti-transgender activist Posey Parker. Police say they are investigating incidents at protests in Auckland. They say it involves analysing and reviewing a large volume of video footage shared on social media, along with CCTV footage. Marama Davidson was knocked to the ground by a motorcyclist who appeared to fail to stop at a pedestrian crossing during the protest. A former patient of the Lake Alice Psychiatric Hospital's Child and Adolescent Unit says she and fellow survivors shouldn't be forgotten. Live-in woman Carolyn Wildbohr is speaking out after suggestions there could be delays with providing redress. The idea was raised in a briefing for the incoming Minister for the Public Service, Andrew Little, who replaces Chris Hipkins in the role. Officials say they aren't recommending that course of action, but Ms Wildbohr isn't happy it was even mentioned. She says survivors have waited long enough for compensation. A petition with 20,000 signatures has been handed to Auckland Council in a last-ditch effort to sway budget cuts at the Citizens Advice Bureau. The Council's draft budget will be closed for consultation at 11 o'clock tonight and contains sweeping budget cuts to community services, including CABs and libraries. Auckland City CAB manager Kate Anderson says it's not too late for submissions in support.
We've just had a social impact report completed, and that found that for every dollar it costs to deliver our service, we deliver $13.20 of social value to the community. I think many people aren't even aware that this is happening, and they need to know that it's not too late to do a submission. You can do a submission today.
Kate Anderson says the Bureau helps the public with numerous problems, including tenancy, employment and legal issues. The Red Cross says it's using the money donated to its disaster fund appeal following Cyclone Gabrielle to fill gaps not covered by central and local government. The organisation has allocated more than $1 million to Wairoa District Council to help repair 278 yellow stickered homes that need work not covered by insurance. Red Cross Secretary-General Sarah Stewart-Black says the money is already in the Council's bank account.
They're now working through their process with a whole range of people, including the construction industry, local iwi, volunteers and some other project partners that they're exploring activities with to bring together this work program so as quickly as possible they can get people back into their homes.
Sarah Stewart-Black says most of the $18 million donated by New Zealanders to its appeal should be committed within 6 months of the cyclone. And that's the news.
Kia ora, I'm Tom Kitchen, and today on The Detail, more grim assessments on the state of our climate.
We are playing dice with the future of humanity here, with the future of civilization, and the level of seriousness of the action from governments around the world just does not match up to the risks that we face.
Has Labour lived up to its promises to do more to help solve the crisis? The Detail on Apple, Spotify, RNZ, or wherever you get your podcasts.
This is RNZ National, on air online, on digital TV and iHeartRadio. Back to Checkpoint with Lisa Owen very shortly. We'll have the short forecast now, though, released just before 5 o'clock from the Met Service, midnight Wednesday, and it's northern to Taumaranui, including Coromandel Peninsula, the Bay of Plenty and Taupo. Isolated showers becoming more widespread for a time this evening, then clearing tomorrow morning and becoming fine. Taranaki, Whanganui and Taihape. Isolated showers turning to rain with heavy falls for a time this evening. Gisborne to Wairarapa. Rain with heavy falls spreading north from Hawke's Bay this evening, followed by showers becoming fine in Gisborne and Hawke's Bay tomorrow. Showers clearing from Nelson and inland Marlborough this evening. Otago and Southland, showers becoming isolated this evening, snow to 500 metres until tonight. To Buller and all the way down to Fiordland, mostly fine, with showers about northern Westland and Buller clearing this evening. And the Chatham Islands, showers turning to occasional rain tonight. It is coming up to 7 minutes past 6. I'll have more news for you at 6:30.
Nā mihi Mark, no mai, hoki mai. This is Checkpoint, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. A petition with 20,000 signatures was handed to Auckland Council today in a last-ditch effort to halt budget cuts to the Citizens Advice Bureau. Consultations on the Council's draft budget will be closed at 11 o'clock tonight. Our reporter Felix Walton was there.
Save our communities! Save our CAB! Save our communities! Save our CAB!
Dozens of employees, volunteers and clients from Auckland's Citizens Advice Bureaus gathered outside the council building to deliver their petition. Stacks of paper containing a list of 20,000 signatories were sealed inside a wooden heart to be accepted by Mayor Brown. But before he did, the Mayor shared his plan to cut their funding and have the government pay instead.
We are proposing to cut $2 million worth of grants to CAB, but we're still supporting them with around $650,000 in rental subsidies. I will be asking for the government's assistance to fill the funding gap.
Mayor Brown says the work done by CABs is outside the scope of local government.
Only 2% of what you do is directly pure local government. Perhaps you should be protesting outside the Minister of Social Development's office or the Minister of Justice's office. Why not?
But Kate Anderson, the General Manager for CAB Auckland City, disputes that figure.
I was part of the team when that 2% figure was presented. It is disputed by Citizens Advice Bureau, and I think we need to have a longer conversation about that rather than using that figure.
You can tell me tomorrow about that.
Great, fantastic. It'd be really good to explain
I only
that
know
further.
what I know.
Yeah.
If Mayor Brown proceeds with his plan to cut $2 million in funding, Ms Anderson says Auckland's Citizens Advice Bureaus won't survive.
The funding's gone, will be gone by Christmas. Mayor Brown may say that this is central government responsibility, but the fact is, if Auckland Council cuts the funding, Citizens Advice Bureau in Auckland will finish. We will be gone, and the 163,000 people we helped last year won't have anywhere else to go.
Even if Wayne Brown isn't convinced, she hopes other councillors will be.
His position is clear. We've already understood that, but he is one person around that table of 20 councillors plus the mayor. So we're really hoping that perhaps some of the other councillors will really understand that Auckland Council has a responsibility for community well-being.
Irene was a client at the Browns Bay Citizens Advice Bureau. She suffered a serious shoulder injury in 2021, which ACC refused to cover. Without the CAB's help, Irene says she would likely never have worked again.
So I walked into the Citizens Advice Bureau. They took me through the ACC review process, which was ultimately successful. So with ACC's assistance, I got so much better. 2 years of rehabilitation. I'm a gainfully employed ratepayer because of the advice I received from CAB.
Rose says legal advice from her local CAB saved her from $3,000 of debt.
I had nowhere else to turn to. I didn't know what else I could have done. Obviously, I could not afford proper legal advice. And if it weren't for the CAB, I don't know what would be happening to me. I'd be in debt or something.
Rose says Wayne Brown doesn't understand the value CABs bring to the community.
Wayne Brown, I don't know him personally, but he just seems like a rich white guy who's never had financial problems, and it just feels out of touch that he would come out and say something like that.
Tomorrow, Mayor Wayne Brown will have a formal meeting with CAB leaders to discuss their submission.
6 people, including 3 children, have been killed in a school shooting in Tennessee. The attack took place at a private Christian primary school in Nashville, attended by children from 4 and 11 years old. Police killed the 28-year-old shooter, Audrey Hale, who they say identifies as transgender. Hale was armed with 2 assault-style guns and a 9mm pistol. Hale was a student at the school in the past, and police say the attack may have been motivated by unspecified resentment. CNN's Diane Gallagher has the latest.
Tragedy at another American school.
3 children and 3 adult staff members shot and killed at the Covenant School in Nashville, Tennessee, in what police are calling a targeted attack by a heavily armed 28-year-old former student.
The 3 9-year-olds who were killed, Evelyn Dickhouse, William Kenny, Hallie Scruggs. 3 adults, Mike Hill, a custodian, age 61, Cynthia Peak, to my understanding, a substitute teacher, age 61, and Catherine Kuntz, age 60.
Police say the suspect was Audrey Hale, who identifies as transgender and is a Nashville area resident who they say is a former student of the private Christian school located at Covenant Presbyterian Church, which serves preschool through 6th grade. A car near the scene helped identify Hale, and police say they are currently going over writings left behind by the shooter.
We've also determined there were maps drawn of the school in detail of surveillance, entry points, etc. We know and believe that entry was gained through shooting through one of the doors is how they actually got into the school.
Calls started coming in at 10:13 a.m.
The officers had engaged the shooter by 10:27, and she was deceased.
Metro Nashville police say there is video from the school, and the shooting happened on an upper level in a lobby area, not a classroom. A teacher texting her daughter from inside the school.
She said she was hiding in the closet and that there was shooting all over and that they had potentially tried to get into her room.
President Joe Biden weighing in this afternoon on the 129th mass shooting of this year, according to data from the Gun Violence Archive.
We have to do more to stop gun violence. It's ripping our communities apart, ripping the soul of this nation, ripping at the very soul of the nation. And we have to do more to protect our schools so they aren't turned into prisons.
A fresh round of dangerous storms is hammering the southeast in the US from Houston to South Carolina. Flooding and wind gusts are causing damage, but nowhere has been hit harder than Mississippi. At least 26 people have been killed in a violent tornado at the weekend. CNN's Isabel Rosales has more from a small town where residents face a daunting effort to rebuild.
Okay, you're looking at where, right here, where the house was sitting, and the steps were right in front of the sidewalk, right there.
Devastation after violent storms ripped through the southeastern part of the U.S. over the weekend, demolishing homes and killing dozens.
Like with everything that go on, to be honest, I can't take no more. I just can't.
Joanne Winston lost her 2-year-old great-niece, Aubrey, when an EF4 tornado hit Mississippi late Friday night, impacting the towns of Amory, Rolling Fork, and Silver City.
Right there.
Winston says she found Aubrey among the debris.
And I didn't see no house, no nothing. And I looked around and I seen the baby laying a little bit from her from her grandma.
You saw them doing CPR on Aubrey?
Yes.
That must have been horrible to see.
It was. I walked away.
Winston's niece, Jessica Drain, also spoke to CNN. Drain says her 8-year-old son was in the same house as 2-year-old Aubrey. He is now in critical condition on a ventilator.
He had a severe brain injury. They had to go in and take parts of his skull out.
He's been through surgery?
Yeah, he's been through surgery.
Does he need more?
They say he's going to need about 3 or 4 more.
Other families also torn apart by the storms.
Words can't express what I'm feeling. I'm just broken and I'm numb.
David Brown's parents were killed after their neighbor's 18-wheeler landed on their Rolling Fork home during the storm.
But I know that they're in heaven right now. And I was told that they passed away in each other's arms.
The governor of Mississippi confirmed Sunday that President Joe Biden approved a disaster declaration for parts of the state, allowing the federal government to help.
We're going to work really closely with the governor and his team on what we can do to provide that safety and that shelter right now for individuals.
Jessica Drain hoping her family can get help.
Knowing they got to start all over, don't really, you know what I'm saying, know where their help going to come from. Know where their next meal gonna come from, or a roof over their head.
What do you guys have left?
They don't have anything, nothing.
It is 16 minutes after 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. After the biggest street protests in Israel's history, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has delayed his controversial plan to overhaul the country's judicial system. His government has been seeking more control over the appointment of judges and the power to override decisions made by the Supreme Court. The ABC's Michelle Rimmer reports.
As tens of thousands of protesters gathered outside Israel's parliament, inside, opposition politicians staged their own demonstrations of dissent, banging on tables and yelling shame at members of a review panel that approved the government's contested judicial reform bill. With his country swiftly descending into chaos, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has announced the legislation will be temporarily put on ice until the next parliamentary session in a few weeks' time.
Israeli citizens, I am not ready to tear the people apart. For 3 months, I read over and over again the conversations, and I also said that I would turn over every stone to reach a solution. Because we remember that we are not facing enemies. We stand in front of brothers. And I say here and now, there must not be a civil war.
The bill, which seeks to give Israel's religious nationalist coalition greater powers over the country's judicial system, has fuelled widespread anger for weeks and reached a tipping point on Monday. Banks, ports, universities and even airports were shut down after a mass strike was called by Israel's biggest trade union. It's not yet clear whether the proposed delay will satisfy the seas of protesters still gathered in cities across Israel.
I'm going to stay here and fight for what 2,000 years the Jewish people fought for. We will fight for this democracy. The world, listen, we will fight for this democracy.
Right now, what drives me is my daughter, my 9-year-old daughter, that I want her to grow up in this country. I want her to have every possibility she dreams of. And that won't happen if this judiciary overhaul will take place.
Critics have said Mr Netanyahu is pushing through the changes due to his ongoing corruption trial. The Prime Minister has denied those claims. Israel's opposition leader Yair Lapid has called on Benjamin Netanyahu to scrap the judicial overhaul altogether for the sake of the country.
What happened during the past 24 hours is madness. It's a loss of sense and a loss of track. It's proof that this government has lost the brakes. It's dangerous for the state of Israel as it endangers Israel's security. Our home is in danger.
But proponents of the legislation say the bill is needed to correct the country's judicial system and strengthen Israel's democracy, and must not be abandoned under any circumstances. They say growing dissent in Israel amounts to a coup.
Prince Harry has made a surprise appearance in a London court as part of a case against a newspaper publisher. The Prince and others, including the veteran pop star Elton John, are accusing the publisher of the Daily Mail newspaper of phone hacking and obtaining medical records by deception. The Mail strongly denies the allegation. The BBC's Tom Simons reports.
It's only day one of what could be a long legal battle. No witnesses giving evidence, just procedure. So when Prince Harry suddenly turned up, it seemed to send a message. He'll be fighting this battle in person. And it wasn't just him. Elton John arrived next and headed to the plastic seats of Court 76 to sit next to his husband, David Furnish. And then Baroness Lawrence, mother of murdered Stephen. Along with Liz Hurley, Sadie Frost and the former MP Sir Simon Hughes, they're accusing the publisher of the Mail and Mail on Sunday of bugging cars and homes, listening to private telephone calls, paying police officials and obtaining medical and financial records, along with phone hacking. As crowds gathered here inside the court, Harry listened intently to what were often detailed legal arguments. The judge decided that we, the media, can't report some aspects of this case, including the names of around 70 journalists who've been accused. He said that was important to make sure that the process was fair and that the evidence could be heard freely in court.
Elton, over here, please.
Associated Newspapers vehemently denies the allegations and this week will attempt to get the case thrown out for legal reasons.
Love you, Harry.
Some breaking news. The Prime Minister, Chris Hipkins, is understood to be considering the future of the Minister of Economic Development, Stuart Nash, within the hour. Mr Nash is already on a final warning after admitting during a radio interview that in 2021 he encouraged Police Commissioner Andrew Coster to appeal a sentence. The Napier MP also admitted directly contacting an MB official on behalf of a medical worker in his electorate who was having immigration issues. Tonight, Stuff has revealed that in 2020, Mr Nash, whilst the Minister for Small Business, sent an email to senior business figures outlining cabinet discussions and noting his disagreement with colleagues. This came as the government was negotiating a commercial rent relief package during the COVID pandemic. The document governing conduct of cabinet ministers states that discussion at cabinet and cabinet committee meetings is informal and confidential. We are expecting a decision on Mr Nash's future in the next hour. Social media platform Facebook has been criticised for not doing enough to remove suspected scam pages. One rife with scams is the shipping container industry, with people wanting to buy containers to turn them into tiny houses, workspaces or storage. The ABC's discovered one suspected scam which remained active until yesterday, despite getting reported to Facebook. The ABC's Michael Aitken has the story.
Kim Ellison's wish for a drama-free retirement hasn't gone to plan.
The retirement dream, peace, quiet, nature. Yeah, just nice. Sick of all the drama.
Last year, she fell victim to a suspected scam as she browsed Facebook, looking for a shipping container to turn into a tiny home for her move from Brisbane to Russell Island off the coast. She found a page for what she thought was an Australian company and paid an invoice for $4,500.
We were buying a container home, a tiny home, and when we saw the one with the 3 roller doors, my mind started, doing all sorts. So I thought, oh, God, this could be, I don't know, cabins or, for family, extra family when they come over.
But when she got an email asking for thousands more, she phoned the Melbourne-based company Magellan Logistics and was told she'd been scammed by people imitating the business.
They said that had happened to them. They've heard of this business going on and they're actually ruining their business, their good name.
Good morning, Magellan Logistics.
Mel Wraith works for Magellan Logistics and says they've been inundated with calls from people who've been scammed.
So people were losing $5,000, $10,000, even $20,000 depending on what they were buying and how many.
The Australian Competition and Consumer Commission is warning shipping container scams are on the rise. Chair Gina Cascott-Leib says almost 500 people have reported losing $1.8 million over the past year. It's why the consumer watchdog wants new powers to oblige Facebook and other digital platforms to remove proven scam content.
We're highly concerned about really failure to take action and to respond. It is another good example about why we're looking for these binding obligations to take action when notice has been given.
Magellan Logistics says it's discovered 6 Facebook pages using its name and logo without permission, and Mel Wraith says all have been reported to Facebook as a suspected scam. 5 remained active until yesterday, when Facebook removed them after being contacted by the ABC. Facebook's parent company Meta declined to be interviewed. In a statement, it acknowledges scammers present a challenge, but says it dedicates substantial resources to protecting its community from fake accounts. Back on Russell Island, Kim Ellison's bought another shipping container. This time, she made sure she could touch it before she handed over her money.
Let's return now to breaking news that the Prime Minister, Chris Hipkins, is understood to be considering the future of the Minister of Economic Development, Stuart Nash, and there should be a decision within the hour. He is, of course, on a final warning after at least 2 missteps. Political reporter Giles Dexter joins us now. What more do we know, Giles?
Well, Stuart Nash was already on his final warning a week and a half ago after a number of breaches of the Cabinet manual. This time, it appears he broke Cabinet confidentiality, emailing some senior business figures in June 2020 regarding a commercial rent relief package that the government was negotiating at the time. Now, this is a massive breach of the Cabinet manual. And so we have contacted the Prime Minister's office and we understand that he is considering the implications of this and considering the future of Stuart Nash and Cabinet at all. He was demoted to the absolute bottom of the rankings after those other breaches, so he cannot slide any further out of Cabinet without being kicked out entirely. We are likely to get an update from the Prime Minister in the next hour.
And just to put it in context, Giles, you said he's on his last warning. What were his missteps?
So the first one was after he, this is about 2 weeks ago now, admitted that he'd rung up the police commissioner and asked him whether he was going to appeal a judicial decision. That's a breach of the Cabinet manual. Then a day later, it was revealed that he had been investigated for possible contempt of court after saying that the killer of Police Constable Matthew Hunt should be locked away for a very long time. And then when the Prime Minister sort of went up to him and was like, look, is there anything else you've done? Stuart Nash admitted that in his capacity as a local MP, he had contacted ministry officials around an immigration case in his electorate when the rules really are that you're supposed to talk to the minister, not the ministry. On that Friday, when this all came out, the Prime Minister did put him at the bottom of the rankings, said he was on his final warning. It now appears there is one more headache for the Prime Minister to deal with regarding Stuart Nash.
So Chris Hipkins, considering this as we speak, we believe. You mentioned it's a breach of the Cabinet manual. So there are reports he outlined the discussions, even released documents perhaps too?
Yeah, so speaking to these senior business figures, it was related to a commercial rent relief package that the government was negotiating in June 2020 during the height of that original sort of wave of the COVID pandemic. Now, the email sort of states that discussions with members of New Zealand First who were in Cabinet, who back then they were in government with them. He said that he lost an argument around the Cabinet table and said he was unhappy with and annoyed and surprised about the final outcome. So, not only has he outlined what was discussed in Cabinet, he sort of put his own opinions in regards to that on the line.
Thank you for that, Giles. That is political reporter Giles Dexter. And as we said, they're expecting potentially to have more information on the future of Stuart Nash after new claims that he breached Cabinet rules by sharing information with business leaders and conversations or information about his colleagues' views. Our political team will keep you updated on that as soon as we hear, and news bulletins also, of course. Before we head off, a little bit of your feedback on libraries. So this is potential budget cuts to libraries in Auckland. A number of you have got in touch to say you love the library, in essence. This listener says, my kids used to go every week to get books. I go regularly to borrow books and also for authors' evenings and community meetings. Libraries are the cornerstone of our communities. It is supremely dumb, the idea of cutting their budgets, but then the whole budget proposal is dumb. Someone else says it's short-sighted and ignorance by Wayne Brown. Libraries are more than books, everyday libraries for everyone, that person says. Now, the late news team's going to keep you updated throughout the evening, so stand by for further news on Stuart Nash. It will be shared with you as it comes to hand. And if you missed anything from the program, you can watch Checkpoint on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts from. Tune in at 5 a.m. tomorrow. First up has got the Green Party co-leader, Marama Davidson. She'll be live to address the calls for her to apologise publicly over her comments about cis white men. Do tune in, 5 a.m.
Kia ora, Lisa. Former Police Minister Stuart Nash's future in Cabinet is on the line tonight after revelations of a further breach of the rules. RNZ Pacific has received confirmation that Indonesian security forces last week launched an offensive against the West Papua Liberation Army. They're holding New Zealand pilot Philip Mertens hostage. It's not yet clear if Mr Mertens was in the jungle hideout that was targeted. Fuller's 360 is cancelling at least a third of Auckland ferry services a week due to staff shortages. But Chief Executive Mike Horn says changes to immigration settings should help ease the situation. And Transpower is asking people in Christchurch, Rangiora and Kaiapoi to conserve electricity this evening to prevent power cuts amid a cold snap. And that is our news.
It's about rugby. Fairness.
It's not a fair game now. It's obvious that certainly the island nations haven't got enough money.
Power.